Few moments. I thank you in advance for your patience. And we are live. Okay. First of all, welcome to the Gray Lounge and our very favorite, my personal favorite program, Point to Ponder. This is the episode 7 of Point to Ponder. And here we discuss various projects, various concepts, which revolutionize the way of life, the way of living for people all over the world. And I thank our esteemed guests who make themselves available at very different times, from very different time zones, at various different locations all over the world, gathered together for a cause to bring about certain changes that to me are the need of the hour. And I'm grateful that these sort of concepts, which actually need to be implemented in countries like Pakistan. I thank these gentlemen to think about Pakistan, to be not only thinking, but to bringing these sort of concepts to Pakistan, to make life better, and to make the standards of living better, and to make a country like Pakistan self-sufficient and also up to the mark with the advancements in technologies all over the world. So I would start by handing over the proceedings to Raza Bhai, and just the way we normally do in our program, and then Raza Bhai can one by one take the conversation to the relevant gentleman.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Zubi. Warm welcome to everybody. Apologies for last week. I think it was so difficult to just coordinate everybody's involvement because we were all scattered. And I've just returned from the Middle East as well, back to a cold and wet UK again. And just before we go ahead, really condolences to our Australian friends for the sad loss of Mr. Shane Warne and Rodney Marsh, who I've grown up with great memories with. And I know the whole Pakistan are mourning the loss as well. So if we can just convey our condolences to our friends across there. Today's program, we will really pick up from our last theme about impact technologies that are affecting and threatening some of the existing projects and that are in existence, and how they are making the difference. We have had several questions posed to us, and we wish to address those today as well. But we will take these in a little bit more detail. And today we thought we'd pick up about the water theme, water harvesting, water distribution, and how that sort of can be aided and abetted and made better with the new technologies that are available to us. So with no further ado, if I can bring in Will, who will pick up on the point, and then we'll bring in our other esteemed guests as well. So Will, handing it over to yourself, please.
Thank you, Raza. Greetings, everyone, guests, viewers. Look, I think maybe I'll just start with a bit of an overview about water, and that we're relating this all to the Islamabad Global Leisure City Project, because it makes it very easier to understand if we have a project that we can apply these theories to, if you like. And so, in brief, there's a plan for a city with 250,000 souls in it in stage 1 as a satellite of Islamabad, and this is a sustainable city. And I won't go on too much about that because we've spoken about that in previous points to ponder. But one of the sustainability aspects, and a very critical one indeed, is the water aspect of the project. When you create a city, huge amounts of water are needed, not just for the construction of the city, but for the sustenance of the people who live there, but also for the irrigation of the agriculture that creates the food that the people in the city are going to consume. So 250,000 people consume a lot of food. And at the moment, the environment or the landscape outside of Islamabad, particularly to the south and the west, is not conducive to high density or high productivity, high production agriculture, but it can be. And so part of the technologies that we're talking about is how we're going to bring water to Islamabad in adequate quantities to irrigate a major agricultural project. Indeed, we're hoping that we not only feed the 250,000 people in the satellite city, but as many people as again, because the intention is for in stage 2, 3, and 4 for the city to grow up to a population of 500,000. And in the interim, if we overproduce food, then there's always room to sell food into the market. It's always, and particularly the type of food that we're proposing, which is organic, free of chemicals, and high nutrition. And there are, we won't get into the agricultural aspects, but food can be grown with high nutritional value or low. It depends on a variety of agricultural aspects, but our intention is to make this food highly nutritional. And the importance of that is that if you have the nutrition in the food that should be there, that is deemed essential, as like all plants and food crops, DNA demands certain minerals to optimize the output. If you optimize the output, then you can have such good nutrition coming from the food. And I can't cite any tests now, but I've seen several, and these are quite large tests, meta studies, you might say, that show that you can eat 30% less food and get the same nutritional output, the same impact. So if your food is nutritional, you don't have to eat the mass. If it lacks nutrition, then people will consume up to 30% more. It's kind of an interesting little factoid that I'll drop in there. So we're conscious of issues like this. And so having nutrition in food means you're more efficient in delivering nutrition to your population. And then that has to do then, of course, with using 30% less water. So these efficiencies become sustainability issues. So, okay, so how do we get so in the first instance, we've got to get water from somewhere to Islamabad. And we're talking about in the order of, and there needs to be further studies on this, but my preliminary estimates are that we need about 2.5 to 2.25 gigaliters every week arriving. So it's a significant amount of water in anyone's language. And that once we've got the water on the site, how do we maintain it? How do we stop it just disappearing? And so what we're going to talk about is the technologies that allow us to do this. So what I might do is I'll introduce each part of the chain of, so there's a water cycle that we're talking about. It's about husbanding the water on the site. I might hand over to Sergei to talk in more detail about each aspect, and I can introduce and tie it together as a chain. But in the first instance, in the Gulf of Arabia, there is enough water floating above the sea to do what we need, and much more than enough. And so our first task is to entice the water vapor that has evaporated off the sea and is floating in the air. How do we entice it up to the site? So Sergei, can I hand over to you for a broad explanation and maybe some detail on the principle of that technology?
Before I do, and hello everybody. Before I do, Will, I think we need to expand a little bit, because getting water on the side in a sustainable way has to rely on some mechanisms that are going to be redundant and help each other to do the task, the job. So I see it in basically three broad perspectives: strategic, long-term perspectives, medium perspective, and a short-term perspective. And they would require different technologies to be applied at each state. But overall, we are going to have a sustainable water supply to the region. And I think that is an important point I think we need to consider. We cannot rely on a single technology in a rapidly changing world, whatever technology that may be. And I think having redundancy in a range of technologies that deliver what we need is going to be the key to sustainability and water security. I think that is an important issue. Going back to your question, I probably would like to address it in that three broad perspectives, if you wish. And first, I'll do a very broad overview, and then we'll go into details with questions as we need to. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Do you want to describe the short, medium, and long-term strategies, and then we'll come back and do the short term, then the medium, and then the long? So just give us an overview, Sergei. You're quite right. That's a very important. It's a four-dimensional problem. It's not a three-dimensional one.
Well, yeah. So in the long run, I start with the long term, and I give it a horizon of between 10 and 15 years, and I will explain later on, if we have a question, why that is the case. But I think what we need to do, we need to rely on original patterns of natural vegetation that maintains seasonal variety of positive weather conducive to agricultural production, if we are keeping agricultural production in mind. And that means planting trees, planting them in appropriate places, planting them with specific technologies to make them more region-specific and robust to current weather conditions, and begin to supply moisture through what I call E-Forest regional climate change program, which means using the technology that we can use in the short term to deliver the moisture from the ocean, but place it in such a way that it will mimic the original or close to historic climate patterns in the region. And so that is kind of a broad overview of a long-term strategy. And it goes...
May I just interject just very quickly, Sergei, that this very effectively interweaves with the Prime Minister's 10 billion tree tsunami. These projects are so totally aligned. They're our goals as well, and so I think it's important to understand that the type of tree and the location is critical to a good outcome. And to date, and this is not the Prime Minister's program, but the billion trees that were planted before Prime Minister Khan came into power were planted in the wrong spot and the wrong species. They weren't even fruiting trees. And as a result, most of them died, and through lack of water, which sort of underscores how important this is to understand that location and species is important. For our part, we'd like to think that we're not just planting, and this is one of the mistakes, there's an assumption that you need to plant desert trees or water hardy trees that don't need much water. that couldn't be further from the truth. We're looking at trees that will transpire water rapidly and contribute to the water cycle in the region. And so we'd be suggesting very, very strongly that fruit and nut trees would be more appropriate because they share their water. And this is part of the deal. So Sergei, sorry, just wanted to interject that there's a clinical.
I think you are going into too much details without supporting technology, and it may look to a person who is inclined to think about natural resources or forestry or national parks, or any botanist saying, well, this is not true. You know, fruit and nut trees are not going to grow in a desert country. But so let me go to second medium term is between 2 and 4 years. And that is technology to explore subterranean water. We have experience that indicate that given a proper desktop studies and examination of what's on the ground, and that's been confirmed in Dubai, in Canada, we can with high precision determine water amount and water quality that we can access with precision drilling. And that is why the water is always there. There is subterranean water, unlimited, almost unlimited resources. And so I think we need to have that as a backup mechanism, as a mechanism to sustain continuous water supply. That is just my view on that. So exploring and effectively delivering both technical water and palatable water is going to be within 2 to 4 years, giving us a good result for the region. And the third one, which is now, we can bring water using E-Forest technology. We can bring water effectively, and that has been done in both, for example, Mexico, Dubai, Kazakhstan, arid regions. In Iran, it was also tested and successfully done. These projects exist and they are effective. And so these are three, it's a broad overview of 3 technologies that we can use in delivering water to the region in a sustainable way, helping people to prosper. So that's in a short, Will.
So can I just reflect that just for clarity, because we're familiar with these technologies, but many viewers won't be. So the long-term solution is a natural one using forestry to create a biotic pump that will continue to bring water up into the middle of the country, so long as the trees aren't disturbed. Sergei, is that correct?
With addition of E-Forest technology to mimic natural action of the forest to sustain the climatic change. In meantime, before the trees are going to grow. And that is important, Will, because we are planting trees, we need to sustain them, we need to provide water for the growth. And so what we are doing, we are placing E-Forest technology to mimic the action of the forest. And I can explore that in more detail, why E-Forest is actually mimicking natural forest in attracting water. But if we place them correctly, they will act as funnels to draw the moisture.
So we should underscore that we're talking about atmospheric moisture, not groundwater.
Atmospheric. Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And so I mean, we're talking about exactly the same thing, but I'm trying to break it down into time scale. That in the first instance, the E-Forestry, in mimicking forests, encourages the water up to irrigate the forest into a point of maturity, at which time we would hope that the E-Forestry could be dismantled in part or in whole.
That's correct. Yeah.
And when supplemented by subterranean water, which is kind of like, in cricketing terms, long stop for the project, because you can't always predict very large drought cycles. And so you have to have a plan C, if you like, to make sure that in those circumstances you don't lose your forest because you don't have a plan C. So this is subterranean waters brought to the surface. So that's the long picture, is to recreate forestry, and in doing so change the microclimate in the area of the forestry to the point where it continues to biotically pump water up from the sea up inland into Pakistan. Yeah.
Gents, if I may just interject here. So we're talking about bringing water from the Arabian Sea through the E-Forest mechanism up north, but we also have from the northern areas as the glaciers and the mountainous areas where the water passes downwards as well. Yeah. So I know for a fact that a few years ago we had flooding due to water coming from the north, and this spread all the way down and out into the Indian Ocean. Is there a mechanism that we can maybe use for that as well? Because we're talking about two extremes of the temperatures, really.
There is. The glacial melt is seasonal. So it only occupies a few months of the year. And I would suggest, and I'm sure Sergei would agree, that at the moment the glacial melt gets down to the sea far too quickly. And so it would be in everyone's best interest to slow that water down so it has a chance to hydrate the landscape on its way. And if you look at the original nature of the river systems that lead from the Himalayas down to the sea, they're not what it looks like now. Now they look like canals that rush the water all the way down, and so everyone just gets to look at the water very quickly as it moves on. But originally, and without doing any research about Pakistan, but just knowing the way these things would generally happen on the planet, the rivers would have been very long meandering rivers that slowed the water down and encouraged the water to spill out into levee banks, into floodplains, irrigating the landscape and hydrating it up to some depth. Do you think, Sergei, would you support that?
Well, Will, in a mountains region, it's a really, because the altitude changes, it's a huge.
I'm not talking about the Himalayas, but from the base of the Himalayas, it's about 1,200 kilometers.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you said, but I think also we need to think about the fact that the melting of the glacier is due to unusually hot weather. If we stabilize the regional climate and return it back to historical air mass movement of, let's say, 100 years.
Climatic patterns, yeah.
We are going to change climatic pattern, and we are going to slow down the melting. So we are not just single purpose driven, get the water from the Gulf, right? We are actually saying, let's stabilize the region. And there is a if you let me say that, habit of air masses to move with a particular frequency in the region. And what we are looking at doing, we are looking at returning that to more historically driven patterns. And that means stabilizing. Having said that, when we are introducing E-Forestry, we are introducing powerful mechanisms of regulating. So we can apply a regulative strategy with what we've got to further stabilize the climate. So, and that's the point I would like to make.
Just to add to that, Sergei, and to quote Peter Andrews, who is a bit of a mentor to us on water management in landscapes. What Sergei is referring to is returning the landscape to its original function before humanity started to play with it and cause it damage. And so by understanding the original function of the landscape, you can return it to balance, which includes a water balance, temperature balance. And so once it's back in balance, it changes the climate enough to bring it into a very stable situation. So it's better for human habitation, it's better for agriculture. And when I mean better, just let's take agriculture for an example. If your diurnal temperature ranges are modified so that there are less extremes between the nighttime minimum and the daytime maximum, then most research shows a 30% increase in agricultural output just because of the temperature is modified. You don't have super hot days and super cool nights. Plants like that, they fruit more. So and I guess what's key to this, so I think we've made the point fairly clearly, but what's key to this is that there's a component in the landscape that has been neglected, and it's the water tanks, as Peter Andrews likes to call them. The ground is actually a water tank, and it's the ideal water tank because if you store the water in the ground, you get almost no evaporative loss. And so it's a very efficient way to store water. And you think, oh, well, if you've got all the water stored in the ground, in the sand and the dirt, oh, how do you access it? You know, that's crazy. You know, it's not like a water tank or a dam where you can pump it back up into a tap. But you've got to think about it this way. If the landscape is holding water up to 3 meters deep, which is quite possible, over a large area, 3 meters deep, you have such huge volumes of water in the landscape. It's unbelievable. And here are the benefits of this, right? That the trees always have access to water. And so if it doesn't rain for a year or two, they're not going to die because they've got water in the water table. And so it's commonly said, and this is just generally speaking, but it paints a picture that's easy to understand. If you have a meter of fresh water in the landscape, you can go without rain for a year and your trees won't die. If you have 2 meters of water in the landscape, you can go for 2 years before your trees run out of water and die. And if you have 3 meters, you can have drought for 3 years and your trees won't die. So I'm talking very broadly, and obviously different regions would react differently, but it gives you an idea of the principle of what we're trying to do. By storing water in the ground, you make your landscape anti-fragile. It's not going to die and fall over every time there's a drought. Now, the other aspect of this is that if you get trees with what we call a high calorific value, they grow quickly, or they transpire lots of energy, lots of water, from their leaves in the daytime, then they're actually the most efficient pumps that we know. We can't replicate the efficiency of these pumps. Small amount of energy that they get from the sun and the large amounts of water they move from the ground through the roots, up the trunks and out of the leaves into the atmosphere is mind-blowing, to just put it loosely. And I think that's been something that humanity has neglected because it's not easy to see. But when you do understand the volumes of water that are pumped out of trees into the atmosphere every day and that come back down every night as dew or rain onto the landscape, it starts to paint a very powerful picture of energy transfers in the landscape. So it's not just about water moving around in the landscape, because as water leaves the leaves, that was badly said, as the water evaporates from the leaves in trees, it goes from a liquid to a vapor. And so I'm talking now grade 4 and grade 5 primary school science, okay? When water changes state, it consumes the energy and it holds it. The water molecules become like energy batteries, just to put it in other terms. So they suck up the heat and the energy around them. And in doing that, they're chilling the atmosphere above a forest, above the leaves. And that chilling is significant chilling. And this is the cooling in the daytime that we're talking about. And when the moisture that is clinging to the forests all day, because the moisture in the air will hang around the coldest gradient in the region, which will be the forest. At night, as the temperatures drop, the moisture is encouraged out of the atmosphere. It condenses and it goes from a vapor back to a liquid. And as it does that, in that change of state, 100% of the energy it's stored when it changed from water to a vapor is suddenly released at that moment. And so it's warming the air at night. And this is this whole diurnal temperature change mechanism, that it's just the water changing state in the daytime and the night that helps to modify the temperature. And this is a large part of the climate change. It's not the whole thing, because the water needs to move. The energy then is the natural outcome of water changing state every day. And so this very important part of the water cycle, and I'm sure, I mean, put your hand up if you learned about this in grade 5 in primary school. You know, yeah. It's like, this is very basic, but you learn about it and then you forget about it, and then we neglect it at our peril. And so if we can reinstate 10 billion trees, and they're all doing this effectively, you're going to cool the country in the day, or the regions where the trees are, and you're going to warm the nights. And so it becomes better for human settlement. And as I said before, better for agriculture, which is a very important aspect of what we're doing. So I don't want to go on too much, but that's, for me, a very important point. And the water is stored in the tank, which is the ground. So by bringing the moisture up, and as Sergei said, there's many parts to this, right? But it's the vapor, the vaporized water coming off the sea being enticed up by a biotic pump or by E-Forestry into the inland of the country, and then being delivered into the ground and stored there without water loss. So people think it goes into the ground, it keeps disappearing to the center of the earth, or it dribbles away or it evaporates. It does none of those things. It stays in a freshwater lens towards the surface. And the reason it stays to the surface is that freshwater, or rainwater or dew, is lighter than groundwater generally, which is mineralized, has metals and salts in it that are either dissolved or in suspension. And so the freshwater will sit on the saline water, or the slightly salty water. And so your freshwater lenses need to exist. And I guess while I'm there, I might just extend that a little bit. You often see dieback in forests because the salt water rises. It's because the freshwater lens was removed, usually mechanically. There are other ways it can disappear. But if you suck all the fresh water out of the ground using mechanical means, then the saline water just rises. It naturally takes its place. So there's a balance there. And then Raza, with your reference to the melt from the Himalayas, and even normally that happens because there's the summer winter changes in climate. There will always be some melt. I think it's beholden on us to understand that just letting it pass by quickly and do nothing with it is so remiss, because that's not how the nature would have dealt with it originally. The original function of the landscape would have embraced that water and slowly moved it around in big meandering rivers with with we call them billabongs or little swamps and ponds, and the whole waterway would have been like a swamp, not like a river rushing right through. So the water migrating through this longitudinal swamp would have allowed that melt to get into the landscape. Now, there are other mechanisms. If it comes down quickly, like a bit of a mini flood, then levee banks would allow that water to break down into the floodplains, which slows it right down, because by allowing the water to spill out of the riverbanks into a maybe several kilometre wide floodplain, of course, the speed of the water goes down and the surface area of the ground goes up. And what happens is that more water gets into the ground and we store it in that tank. And so we're not letting it rush by. So for me, the net result, what Sergei as well, for everyone who wants to do agriculture, having the water up in the region where we need it is critical. How we do that, there are mechanisms. Once we've got it there stored in the ground, that's the next part of the story. How do we use it? Sergei, do you want to add to that discussion?
I just wanted Will to kind of summarize it, basically, that we have several aspects to it. Landscape technologies. So how do we work with landscape, entice the water? How do we deal with it? How do we store it? And that's one thing. We've got natural mechanisms that we are engaging as a biotic pump. So that's a long-term softening of the climate, ensuring weather patterns are sustained. And we have a third component that is extremely important, and you mentioned about, Will. It's actually changing the patterns of land use and attitudes of people. We cannot do successfully all those changes and make those changes effective if people will continue doing the wrong thing. And because there is a growing number of us, everybody is doing the wrong thing, is multiplying to a horrendous impact on the landscape. So we have to be mindful of our impact and modify our landscape use and land use practices. And I think those three components kind of summarize it, Will.
Can I let me just tease that point out a little bit more. It's very important you brought it up. And I think, Raza, you shared some videos with us recently about the environmental practices and the groups who are working inside Pakistan to bring back national parks and so it would appear to me that politically this is acceptable and embraced, it would appear, by the population and policed by the government, so that landscape management is a thing and it can be extended. And what Sergei was referring to, and what's going to be very important if we're to get this right, beyond the needs of this project in Islamabad, and I'm saying beyond the needs, this is the residual impact or the lateral beneficial outcome that we don't need but will happen because of what we're doing will be enhanced if people understand that the landscape can be used. And I'm going to get very simple here, Sergei. Don't hammer me. I'm just going to simplify it for the viewers. So the landscape has essentially three basic functional areas. Yeah, and I'll just broadly outline this, Sergei, and you might want to sort of chime in then with a bit more detail knowledge on this. But in all landscapes, you have high ground and low ground, and then you have the ground in between, the slopes in between the high ground and the low ground. And so very broadly, you can define these three functional areas. And just remember that I'm grossly oversimplifying this. It takes some effort to actually define these areas properly, and you have to have all the topography and geology and hydrology at your fingertips. But when you look at high ground traditionally in unaffected areas, and I mean unaffected by man or mankind, there's usually forest on the high ground, and that there's a few reasons for that. One is that because of the way wind carries seeds through the air, when wind carrying seeds hit a peak and they go over the peak, there's always an updraft on the other side that causes a turbulence on the lee side, so on the opposite side from where the wind's coming, that drops the seeds out. And so the seeds always drop on the lee side of a mountaintop. And if the wind comes from the other direction, they drop on the other side of the mountain, but still towards the top. And so your forestry is always encouraged, or the types of seeds that yield what's described as boughed trees. So a bough is a branch, you know, as big as your arm or bigger, right? That's a bough. Boughed trees tend to propagate in this way. And then also you have, when you start to get forestry growing on hilltops, you have birds and small animals, and they're also propagating more seeds. And so you build the complexity of your forest. So that the forests want to be on the top. It's the way it is. Okay, I'll come back to that point, but just remember there are generally forests on the tops of hills. Not always, but generally. And if you think of landscapes generally, you'll know what the natural form is to have trees across the mountaintops. And then at the bottom, you have, well, that's where all the water wants to go. You know, when it rains, it runs down to the lowest point. And so historically, the landscape wanted to be a swamp in those areas, highly hydrated, lots of water, lots of wetland plants and trees that loved wet roots, a very different type of forest. And so that's really the water tank in this story, is the low point. And all of the reeds and grasses and small trees and bigger trees, they are the mechanical mechanism that slows the floodwaters down. And then when you get flood debris coming down the low points, down all the creases and creeks and gullies and rivers in a landscape, all this debris comes down and packs around the trees and the shrubs and the plants and forms little dams everywhere and slows the water down. But in slowing the water down, what it also does is it pushes the water out. Okay, and so a greater surface area, a wider valley gets wetter. Traditionally, we think of rivers as being contained in the riverbed and running straight down. But the real function of a river is to deliver the water out into the landscape as far as it can from the center line of the river. And that's how the mechanics of rivers naturally work if we don't interfere with them. And one of the big interferences that we have in the landscape is hoofed animals. So cattle, sheep, goats, horses have hooves. These animals do such damage to the wetland landscape that it can't behave the way it needs to. So you don't get the growth, and then you don't slow down the water, then you don't get, dries out, then you get erosion, because the plants also hold the soils together. The faster the water, the more the erosion. So these things all come together. And so the water tank down there, if you have the right sort of trees growing in it, are transpiring that every day, and they're sharing that water out into the floodplains and slightly up the slopes. And that is delivered, at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning as dew or as rainfall, and that irrigates those sloped areas in between the forests and the ponds at the bottom. So what that means is that the slopes suddenly, even though they're not an actual critical part of the mechanism yet, they're very good for growing things, for crops, and even for having cattle and goats and sheep, because it doesn't really matter what you do to the sloped areas between the high points and the low points. You're not directly impacting a function of the landscape, because the moisture coming from the trees in the wet, low areas is going to ride through the air and land there regardless. So on the slope, you could put an airport or a city or agriculture. It doesn't matter. The function still from the low area is going to occur. Now I'm going to go back to the forest and explain the other half of this function. And that is that when you've got a mature forest and it has humus on the forest floor that's quite deep, and I'm talking at least 1/2 a metre deep, and I'm guessing, well, I'm hoping that most people have had the pleasure, if you like, of walking through a rainforest or an old forest with lots of broken down organic matter on the ground. The ground's soft. There are beetles and worms in it, decaying leaves and twigs, and the ground is soft and aerated. And what's happening there is that as leaves and twigs and branches fall out of the trees, they land and they degrade, they get eaten by beetles, consumed by worms. They turn eventually into soils, but added to that is all of the fecal matter from the beetles, the insects, which is significant. The carcasses of all the insects, again, very significant. Small animals, their fecal matter, their dead bodies, all of these, birds, all of this. It's a huge amount of input, organic input, that creates, honestly, the most brilliant fertilizer that no one can replicate without creating a forest. And so what you end up with is this great production ground of fertilizer. It's like a tea bag, if you like. And when it rains in a forest and it gets through to the forest floor, the moisture goes through this tea bag and takes all these nutrients down into the ground. Now, we're on the top of the hill. So what happens is that the moisture coming through from the rain, now fully loaded with nutrients from all of these things that have fallen down into the forest floor and degraded, is sliding downhill, down the slopes. And so depending on the slope and the amount of rain in the area and the length of the slope, it might take 3 months or 3 years for that water to get from the top of the slope to the bottom where the water tanks are in the wet areas, but it'll get there eventually. And then it keeps coming and it never stops. And so you have a continual feed of fertilizer coming from the forests on the crests of the hills, feeding the slopes. So if you put a crop in there, or even a pasture for cattle, you're going to have the best quality grass, the best quality beef, milk, wheat. It doesn't matter what you're growing, because you've got the highest quality fertilizer that never gives up. It has all the nutrients that are ever required, naturally coming out of the forest. Now, the balance between the fertilizer capacity of a forest and the needs of a crop on a slope is a balance thing. It's something that Sergei and I have worked with, and it needs, considerable science, let's put it that way, to make it work properly. So you see what's happening is that the forests on the top of the hills are permanently fertilizing any crops that you might have on the slope, and the wet areas at the bottom are permanently irrigating the slopes. And so what more do you need? You need maybe one more thing, and this is kind of interesting side note, but a lot of agriculturists will say, well, what about insects, and what do you do about them? Do you need insecticides? What do you call it? Do you need to kill insects with chemicals so that your crops aren't damaged? And there's a very interesting thing in insects' exoskeleton called mental blank. Sergei, help me. You know what this is called?
Chitin.
Sorry?
Chitin.
Oh, chitin, yes. CHYT. AN?
Chitin.
Chitin.
Yep.
Or some people pronounce it chitin, but
Chitin. Yeah.
yeah, And so when the shell of an insect breaks down, the chitin or the chitin in the exoskeleton takes a long time to break down. It's very hard for that because it's mainly silica. It's quite tough. But when the chitin or chitin gets into the tea that is coming down the slopes and gets picked up by the crop through the roots and into the plant, no insects of that species that belong to that chitin will eat that crop. So the more insects, because it's for them like cannibalism, they won't do it. They smell it and that keeps them away. So the more diverse the insects you have in the forest, the more resistant to insect attack your crop will be. There's not enough work done on that research, I believe, but we understand the mechanism. And in nature, sure, it works. There are other things that forests do naturally to deter attack by insects, but it's all about gaining balance. And when you return the landscape to its original function, it lessens the eventuality of, say, a locust attack or some particular beetle or grub or butterfly eating crops, because things are in balance and you don't get these huge occurrences. Mushin.
I just wanted to note that you talk about forest on hilltops and slopes. One of the things about the health of the forests in Germany, you even have this German word Waldsterben in general language. These are all monoculture forests that we have now. And I don't know about Pakistan, but in Europe, there's just one tiny piece of original forest left in Poland. The rest is just forest as we plant them. So they have one type of tree, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I just wanted to highlight that when you're talking about trees and forests on hilltop, you're talking about diverse forests with
not
tons of
monoculture.
different trees, which attract tons of different insects, blah, blah, blah. I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, and it's the artificiality of the European forest that's at part to blame. Sergei, you're the agriculturalist. Do you want to sort of top that up a bit?
Well, the most diverse areas of Europe, I suppose, forested areas are military polygons. So they are highly diverse niches of.
Just a little remark.
I'm not recommending. I'm not recommending.
I just wanted to talk about it. Berlin Wall came down, and so we had this corridor that wasn't touched for 40 years. And we had the most diverse forest. Sorry, I just couldn't stop.
No. It's a well-known fact that. But what I'm saying, I suppose, if we are becoming aware, and yes, we do have a very low diversity in majority of European forests, but they still perform the function. They still hold the water. Okay, and that's where land use practices, change in land use practices come together. We cannot rely on a single thing. We cannot just go and plant a diverse forest or introduce diversity in the forest when people go and start coppicing and started clearing down the story and doing the thing they want to do. We need to have recognition of that beauty of diversity that helps us in turn. And I think, and I'm not suggesting any environmental police by any means. I'm just suggesting development of our awareness and consciousness. And I think here we have to go hand in hand with landscape. We have an opportunity. How are we going to use it? And it brings us back to introduction of technology. It's kind of the same thing. We are talking about how do we do it? But a large part of it is actually changing our own perception of the picture. And I think we need to probably take a special time to discuss it, but I just want to keep it in focus. Mushin, that's basic, very broad answer to the question.
Yeah, let me underscore the problem a little bit more. I mentioned before that we have to keep hoofed animals out of the wetlands or they damage them. And so that means they have to be fenced to stop the animals getting in. And then you have land ownership issues and that suddenly the farmers can't graze where they normally were grazing. And that's much more difficult than you would imagine. And no one wants to have a jackboot style approach to this where you say, this is we're going to do it and they'll just have to live with it. There has to be a negotiated outcome so the farmers don't lose livelihood in the process. It gets very complicated. But in the same way that you have to fence off the wetlands, if you want to grow a 0.5 metre deep humus on the forest floor, you have to fence off the hilltops. So what does that mean? It means the slope's the only unfenced bit. So the animals can run wild there. Like I said before, we don't care so much because there's not a lot of function going on there. It's the result of the function that impacts the slopes. And if we wanted to put an airport on the slope, that's fine, or a city, a car park, or agriculture. The forest and the wetlands at the bottom of the hill, they'll still function and do their thing all the time. So, but how do you, in essence, take away the usage of the land from people who have historically, for generations, used it in a certain way? How do you come to them and say, well, you can't do that anymore? This is very esoteric. It's hard to understand for farmers because they know that if you take off land, that they'll have fewer cattle, fewer goats, fewer sheep. They have half as much land. But I'll tell you a bit of a truism. This varies, of course, from topography to topography, different climates. But let's just say it's broken into thirds. A third is forest, and this is very random, so don't anyone hang me on this. But just say the landscape, a third is a forest, and a third is wetlands, and they're 2/3 of the landscape you can't use, and you can only put your goats and your sheep on the middle third, on the slope. Okay. So what happens is that because that landscape on the slope is so fertile and productive and nutritious, the number of goats or sheep that you can support on that lesser area is significantly greater, and I would argue greater than if you had the whole 100% of the land for goat use. You'd support more goats on 1/3 supported by natural mechanisms than you would by destroying all of that and having goats everywhere. Sergei?
I'm not with you on that one. No. We have our differences. But what I'd like to
in principle, that's the sort of thing. I mean, it may be not that extreme.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to goats, but if we grow a crop, we can produce amount of wheat or other production. We can increase that production to the extent that it would cover theoretically all the areas we subtracted from the usage and still have no damage. That is absolutely true. I wouldn't go to goats, I wouldn't go to cattle, because if you overstock, the whole landscape is destroyed. No. Hoofed animals, you've got to be careful. There is a stocking limit on compaction and damage. You don't do that. But if we are talking about crop growing, that is a different matter. We can produce 3-4 times the amount that entire area would be providing under so-called normal landscape management. That is absolutely true. We have confirmed it's not just a statement not backed up by anything. We have confirmed data about that much increase in production if it's done properly. So
now, and this doesn't involve using special fertilizers or any crop enhancers, or this is using natural fertilizer, natural irrigation. And so the beauty of these systems is that your crops will be irrigated and fertilized forever, so long as the planet keeps rotating, so that the sun rises and sets every day.
you're very optimistic, Will. Forever, nothing is forever.
True. But you understand.
But I admire your optimism, Will.
Yeah. Well, we move towards utopia slowly. Let's put it that way.
Okay, I have a few questions.
Sure.
When we talk about, I mean, when we generalize the whole concept of forestry, is it okay to generalize, or would we require in-depth studies on ground and underground resources and underground chemistry of because from south going up to north of Pakistan, we have not just the strata, which is different, but also the climate and the conditions and the conditioning of the land. And because, you know, when that part I get, that with 10 billion trees, the effects that you mentioned in terms of the floating rivers and also the displacement of energy and also the effects of that in the cool days and the warmer nights. But is that not area dependent? And also, I mean, is there a chance, I mean, of probably not being able to replicate a success model of an area A into an area B, and probably because of that, the whole concept of the 10 billion tree may also not be somehow possible? Or do you think it may take time, but it will work in any case?
Sergei, you can answer this briefly, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was nodding this and that. No, I think what the beauty of the method that we're using is based on the study of the oldest landscapes on Earth. Australia landscapes are the oldest landscapes on Earth, and they have developed those mechanisms that we can still see working. And you're right, they have to be specific. The tree species have to be specific to hydrology, to soil depth, to the slope. So we're just describing a very general model, but application of that general model with modification to specific conditions has worked on more than 500 different settings and farms around Australia. And this is remarkable. It worked in United States, application
China.
of that.
China, Southeast Asia. Yeah.
So we have
Philippines.
We have data that confirms that general model, provided you know the specifics and how to fit it and how to look at landscape functions, define it for specific area, actually works everywhere we know of. So I don't think Pakistan is going to be an exception from overall rule.
Now, okay, okay, I get that. That is a good thing, because now you have statistical data to plan this accordingly, and there might be slight changes, but it is technically, theoretically possible because it's practically being implemented in various areas that you have mentioned. Now, but when we talk about 2.5 gigaliters or or a certain amount of water that we require to travel through these biotic pumps through this mechanism based on the trees, the plantation of the trees and specific plantation of the trees in various areas based on the topology of the area. Now, how does, I'm just asking in general, how does
Austin.
Hello.
Like he froze in midair.
He did. But I just wanted to, while we're waiting for him to come back, I think there was a question about study. Do we need to conduct further studies? As far as method is concerned, no, we don't. As far as application of the method to specific location, definitely yes. And I think that's where additional benefit of our engagement is brought into Pakistan, because we are transferring the technology, transferring the methods. We are actually building capacity, local capacity. And I think that's a positive point I'd like to make.
And I want to flip back to your earlier point, Sergei, about the human usage of the landscape and changing that. That really is probably one of the. Okay, so just say that we've got the technology sorted. We know how to get the water up and do this, but how do you stop the population of Pakistan from pulling down the fences, putting the goats on the hilltops, draining the swamps? It's a big task, and it's also the demographic input, social impact, I should say, about going to farmers mainly in these areas and saying, can we suggest to you another way of doing it? And if there's one thing I've learned, it doesn't matter where you are on the planet, the farmers are the most stubborn people to work with, because they've done it that way their whole life, and their fathers did, and sometimes their grandfathers. And who are we to come up and say, you got to do it this way, it's going to change? And they won't. It's very hard to get them to change. Hey, Mushin.
I was wondering about Pakistan, Raza. Just some information I would like to need. So in the Philippines, the average age of a farmer is 62 by now. When I came first to the Philippines, it was 60, by the way. So and this is actual data. So the average age of a farmer is 60, which basically means there is no young people coming back into farming. Is that the same in Pakistan, something like that, or are young people going into farming?
I think overall, and I don't have stats to prove this, but there is a tendency that farming is from the elder generation. More and more of the arable farming land is being converted into use for other purposes. So there is the drive away. Certain cash crops are a dying art. We have large volumes of, for example, sugarcane, which are difficult to maintain and keep. And before, the farmers had the sugarcane, converted it into sugar and used it for their own use, and then sold to the market. So there is a big drive away from farming as well. But there's also a certain revival where people are going back into and looking at organic farming and looking at other methods as well. So a little bit of both, but I would like to see this refer back to the old farming methods, or new farming methods, but utilizing land for farming as well. You tend to find that in the northern Punjab area is where most of the arable farming lands are. And then in the Sindh area, there's vast desert areas. And the government is practically giving away these lands, and if they can be put to good use and converted into usable lands, then there's huge chunks of land which are being made available. I mean, we could have access to those without any difficulty if we were to demonstrate the ability to convert that land into usable land. And we're talking about quite a sizable, land sizes there. So the point I'm making is that I think Zubi touched upon, the country is so vast. We have the 4 seasons all at the same time. We have in the Punjab literally means the land of 5 rivers. You know, we have the 5 major rivers and quite a complicated network of canals distributing water from one river mechanism into the other river as well. Some of it's antiquated, and I remember early 70s when these were put into practice, so they do need modification. But there's a good basis for putting some of our ideas into practice, and if approached and presented to the government well, they would only be too willing to work with us on these ideas.
And we have the largest irrigation system of the world installed by the British government at that time.
Yeah, this is the canal systems that I'm talking about. And these canals are in themselves like rivers because they're huge sort of movement of water from one river to the other. Interestingly enough, what Will mentioned earlier about the initial phase of the tree plantation, which was deemed a failure because the wrong type of trees were planted and then the areas that they were planted. But I think they've realized this and made improvements to this. And even with the start of the spring, there's already plans to make these changes further. Fruit-wise, there's an abundance of citrus fruit. We have the oranges and the clementines being done. Mangoes in Pakistan are world famous, and it's a huge export market for the mangoes. We also have a lot of the wheat and rice, etc. as well, but fruits is definitely a way forward, and it's something that the government are very seriously looking at and seeing how improvements can be made on that.
Can I just add to this about food security and land use? It's a very serious matter. If a country can't feed its own population, it must import it. And then that's going to be a tremendous burden on the balance of trade. Countries, it's beholden on governments to ensure that their country can support agriculturally its population. And Russia is a very good example. Russia has always insisted that there was agricultural output adequate to feed the population. There have been moments in history where that didn't happen. There were some famines, but everyone just marshaled everything they had to bring that back around, to the point where I think in terms of land use planning in Russia, Sergei, you may know this better than me, but I think converting agricultural land into any other type of use is incredibly difficult. That's still the case, isn't it? Or there are different zones where they obviously would allow it.
There are regional specifics, and there are commercial considerations for developments and so on and so on. I'm not familiar with general stats on that.
I know very specifically in Slovakia, which is the southeastern part of what was called Czechoslovakia before 1992. So Slovakia is a EU country. It is the only EU country that generates enough food to feed itself and export food. And one of their rulings they have there, it's quite fascinating. I have a friend who's a land surveyor in Slovakia, and so I get a little bit more insight than maybe the average person on this. But if you wanted to get any block of land that is agriculturally zoned, and turn it into, say, a golf course or any other use that's not agricultural. It could be residential, it could be anything. The government charges this is like 10 years ago. I'm sure it's a bigger impost now, but the government had a fee for 10 million euros that you had to put up and was non-refundable as an assessment fee when you were going to do the transfer. And the $10 million fee certainly didn't guarantee that you were going to get a rezone from agricultural to recreational use. You risked your 10 million. And so you can imagine how that slowed down developers trying to sprawl out from townships. And so Slovakia still is mainly agrarian and has these very discrete townships sprinkled all over it. And I have to say it works. It works very well. They feed themselves. And so I think in principle, you have to think at that scale, and Pakistan has a huge population. So what's the current population, guys? Can you
220 million.
220 million?
Mm.
And you must think very carefully then about food security.
Yeah.
So you've got two choices. You have more agriculture or you have fewer people. These are difficult decisions that have to be made. Obviously, more agriculture is the palatable way forward. And then, we see, but these are sort of thoughts that the government must think about, obviously, and that policies must all generally work towards food security. Now, there's some thought at the moment on the planet that we can manufacture food, particularly proteins, in laboratories or in aquaponics or hydroponic facilities, very dense food production units. But I would argue that food out of the ground has a better nutritional value, particularly when it's fed by dead insects and birds out of a forest, irrigated by dew. You're smiling, Sergei.
You know what I thought about with you mentioning general trend to synthetic food production. I thought that developing country or countries like Pakistan have an advantage here, because agriculture is still a very traditional business, and it's very large part of traditional way country has its own image formed within the country. People see themselves, and tradition and culture is supporting that so much that despite of whatever developments on the West are happening with synthetic food, eventually the market for good quality natural food is going to be so lucrative and so big that if we develop opportunities in Pakistan, for example, for natural food production, it's going to be tremendous. It's going to be tremendous market potential in the future. Despite
we are going to import it. We're going to import it because Germany now has 20%. Everybody wants ecological food.
Yeah.
So the difference between ordinary prices and biological or ecological food is 20%. And just saying, Germany is like a huge sponge in the European Union for ecological food, and the European Union is growing immensely demand for those types of food stuff.
Yeah. And this is different. It's not necessarily an organic food, because in my opinion, some certified organic food can be very, very poor. It is certified organic, but it lacks the nutrients. The carrot doesn't taste like carrot I used to have in my childhood from my grandmother's
tomato or potato, or
it's not like that anymore. So that label, certified organic, doesn't give me an insurance of a good quality, food quality. But if we develop these natural ways of production, we have opportunity to develop a new grade of food to present to the market, the food that actually guarantees natural taste, natural flavor, the sweetness of it. It's just tremendous, you know. Even that market potential development is huge.
I'm going to circle back, as someone famously said recently. If you're going to plant 10 billion trees, please make most of them fruit trees.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. Will, I think we need diversity. I'm not sure.
It would be socially.
I'm saying most. That could be 51%.
It would be fantastic socially. I don't know if in Slovakia that's still. I lived in the Czech Republic for quite a while, for a couple of years, and one of the things I've noticed is they still have fruit trees in most of the part around Prague, still
Along
fruit
the road.
trees by the streets,
Yeah.
which are planted so that people, ordinary people, anybody has the right to pick those fruits. And I tell you, these cherry trees, we had cherry days in there. So, if you have like tons of those fruits, then you actually add to the food security and diversity at the same time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can add just from my Russian experience, Mushin. On the south of Russia, it's exactly the same situation. You know, the fruit trees are planted along the streets. And so I remember as a little boy, I would go with my grandmother and collect those apples, for example, or plums from those trees. And it was common for people to do it because they had points of where you can go and you can sell whatever you bring, those fruits, and that would go to make conserves. It would make some, jams and government points. It was incredible because people benefited, plus government production for city regions. It was a really good system. So yeah. Anyway, but I still keep some good areas of natural vegetation.
I got disconnected in the middle, and I wanted to add something to this. The only thing that I am looking at is how quickly, how soon, and how well this thing would very soon turn out to be for a country like Pakistan, being from Pakistan.
3 months, no longer.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm joking. Very quickly. It's a matter of years, not decades.
Yeah. Okay. But see, when we mention the requirements, for instance, because now in the light of all the discussion that we've had so far, be it of biotic pumps and be it of now at the end, we're talking about truly organic food and all this. But now, in the light of all this discussion, when we mention our plan of Islamabad Global Leisure City, there is a certain aspect of technicalities attached to it. That just like you mentioned in the earlier episodes, the energy consumption requirement for the population, and then for the targeted population, how much of energy is to be consumed, which is to be drawn out of the natural systems, and how much from probably in the beginning certain imported from other areas within the country. And then gradually, when the 10 billion tree tsunami thing starts to give us a certain amount of water, and how many trees would be required to produce how much of water that we require, and then how many these trees would provide us fruit and vegetable, and I mean the whole mechanism of balancing the need with the development and the production and the amount of years that it would take for the cycle. Now these sort of technical things, of course, I'm sure that it's part of your the whole proposal, the grand proposal of the project, and the grand calculations that you've made, which of course give you the bottom line figure of what you're looking at, and how the ROIs and how IRRs and all of these things are mentioned, of course, there. But as a layman, as a general perception for a person who does not know the technicalities or wants to indulge into technicalities, what do you see? How do you see all of this being translated into the whole concept behind it in a matter of years, and in a matter of let's say population based? Is it like how many people in how many years could be served by the whole mechanism? And is it dependent on how many people we are supposed to handle, or is it dependent on how many months or years it takes for an average proposal to be composed?
Sergei, do you want to put a time scale on it, or do you want me to have a go? Because there are parts to this.
I'm just unmuting myself. I think you'll give it a go and I'll fill in the gaps.
All right. So the first part is to do a needs analysis, in my opinion. So we have several things that are going on here. We have a need for food. How do we quantify that? How does that impact the importing of foodstuffs? Is that a good or a bad thing? So there's stuff going on there which is beyond the scope of what we would normally be discussing with you, Zubi. Then there's a matter of access to land for agricultural purposes, rezoning thereof, adjustment of ownership, or the collaboration of existing farmers, small farmers, into bigger cooperatives who will then cooperate with the methodology that Sergei and I have been outlining. And so that there's these aspects. There's the aspect of external markets. And you have to understand that if you grow raw foodstuff and you sell it for a unit, if instead of selling it for eating raw, you develop it into, let's just say you put it in a can so it lasts longer, or you pickle it, put it in a jar, then you could argue that the value of this foodstuff now isn't 1, it's somewhere between 5 and 10. You've created employment, you've made your foodstuff last longer, which is a food security tick, because you can store it, and you can wait for the markets in that area or find markets. And so that's one of the reasons why processed food is more valuable, because you can sell it for to the highest bidder. You don't have to get rid of it within 2 weeks before the food spoils. Yeah. So there's developing the agricultural industry is not just about planting trees and crops. It's about understanding the food chain and how we develop our foods, eat it, export it. So these things have to be considered first. Okay, so once you've done that analysis, because I wouldn't suggest we just go, right, oh, let's plant trees, go, we're into agriculture, bang, bang, bang. There needs to be some careful thought into these issues and what the downstream effects of doing these things are. One of the biggest issues, and Mushin brought this up, about poverty really in the agricultural sector. One of the reasons why the population, or probably the significant reason, or probably the only reason, that farmers' average age in the Philippines now is 62, is that they all say to their children, this is a terrible life. I work hard morning to dusk. I earn very little. I don't have enough to live on. Go and learn IT or become an architect or go into music, do anything, but don't do farming. And the children do that. They go off into the cities. And of course, modern universities encourage that. They give student loans. It's a big industry. And so all of the children are sucked out of agriculture. And of course, the population's going to age. You don't study IT at university or get an MBA and then go back and plant rice. Well, you can. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but generally it doesn't happen. So that you have to bring back to agriculture a dignity for growing food that we've lost. The middleman and the retailers, and I would argue also governments to a certain extent in many areas, demean the farmers. They take away their dignity by giving them so little so that they can make more profits on the markups, that they're killing the goose that lays the golden egg. What happens when all the farmers are dead in 20 years' time? There's no food. We're so close to a cliff in places like the Philippines. It's a joke. I remember, I don't know when it was, maybe 4 years ago, I was in the Philippines, and the headline news was, Philippines imports rice for the first time ever. They couldn't feed their population enough rice because the rice farmers were giving up. There were fewer and fewer and fewer. Okay, so I think the greater analysis of how food is used and how the dignity of farmers has to be returned so that they are ensured of a fair return for their effort needs to be done first. And this could well include thoughtful legislation. Yeah, won't be popular with the retailers, but there you are. I've said it. It really is important, or we will have no food. Okay, so and then let's just say everyone's going, yay, let's do this thing. Let's grow food. Let's put forests on the hilltops, and in the low areas we'll put wetlands. Oh, and by the way, forests are very productive. You can grow mushrooms and berries and nuts in forests. They can produce a huge amount of food, generate income. You could put a small resort in there, like an eco resort in a forest on a mountaintop. That's not going to damage the ecosystem. And you can bring people in for tourism on elevated boardwalks so they're not mucking up your mulch. Yeah. And in the wetlands, you can do aquaculture. You can grow fish down there. Taro grows in water, a great food crop. Pecan nuts love wet roots. You can grow lots of pecan nuts in wet areas. There's lots of fruiting trees and useful trees. And again, you can do an eco resort in the wetlands. And plenty of people have done that. But you do it sensitively. Don't bring your cattle with you, for example. Yeah? So if you can organise the strategy about how you go about this without being, let's say, fascist about it, without bullying everyone into that position, causing havoc, because you've got to win people over with the whole, would you say, the importance of this and how everyone can be a part of it. And then how do you then organise people's current property rights and their income, their financial security? How do you manipulate that around in a non-usury way? How do you make people want to come with you and then know that they're going to thrive? Can the government guarantee that people will thrive if they change the way they've done what they've done on their land for the last 100 years? Can the government guarantee that they'll be better off? Maybe that's a thought. Maybe there is a guarantee mechanism required to entice land users into the new form of use. Okay, so these things take time and they can't be neglected. Otherwise, we'll sporadically be able to do what we're talking about. But if you want to do a major change, like plant 10 billion trees and make sure it gives you food security and does microclimatic change in the way that we've been talking over the last hour or so, then you need to have legislation and you need to have a willing population support you. Now, once that is all done, and I don't suggest that you do that first, you must do that in parallel. But if you wanted to start the program, what happens is that in the first instance, you erect the E-Forestry to entice the moisture into the area. That may take 6 months to 12 months, depending on how long it takes to manufacture the equipment and then mount it. It's not complicated machinery. It's not very large, in fact. And so as soon as that equipment is operational, you're starting to move water. Now, the water moves incredibly rapidly. And so it wouldn't take very long for moisture to get all the way to Islamabad if you had a series of e-forests handing the water up into the country from the Gulf, from the sea, right? So, so given that you're irrigating the ground at least within a 3-month period, I would say, Sergei, would you guess that right? 1,000 kilometres, 3 months at least. It could be much quicker than that even, but significant amounts of moisture could be moved in 3 months after the array was erected. Does that feel about right to you?
Well, it depends. It depends on the season, of course. Will.
Yeah, sure.
Usually to run, you have to determine application of that particular technology within each season, and so you have a proper view of original pattern. Whether
it needs more study, but it's months, not years. Yeah.
Usually, yeah. It's a year, 12 months. But what is interesting, work the guys are now doing in Kazakhstan. At first the work was just to test how it does the job. Does it bring rain? Okay, 30% increase. Our guys were saying, oh, we have to take it easy, so we're not going to cause major floods, and you know. And they had a break over New Year period, and now in Kazakhstan they are saying, well, Kazakh government is actually saying, well, bring as much as you can. We can deal with flood, but we cannot deal without water. So it's just interesting how even attitude and requirements of the region actually changes as they see the project developing and evolving and bringing some results. So that is.
Well, let's just say the water is taking a year to get confidently, regularly arriving. Say it's a year. At that point, when you're confident that there's regular rainfall and you can support the growth of agroforestry,
you can plant. Yep.
You start planting then. And so that planting, well, depending on the number of trees you're planting, may take a year or so. But let's say it's the first billion and you can mobilize enough people. So there's 1 billion trees in a year. That would do a very decent forest. Thank you very much. So how long does it take to get tube stock, which is, you know, maybe trees that are like this big, that come in a tube and they're not very big. How long does it take to get tube stock to a point where A, it's transpiring adequately like a forest to then behave like an e-forest, be the real forest and cool the atmosphere above it? I would argue 3 years, Sergei, depending on the crop, of course.
No, depending on what type of trees. I just want to bring some results that we have with seedlings of particular tree species. They are production forestry species, and the goal of the project was to actually establish a database of species and treatments of seedlings that give maximum growth rate and maximum stability of species, of forest species. And what the outcome of that experiment, it was conducted over a longer period of time. And what the results showed statistically that in case of forestry, production forestry, usual pine production, let's just say pine production, is the cycle of pine production is usually around 25 to 30 years, right? They were able to cut it in half. So in 15 years, they're producing mature stand that is ready for harvesting. In addition to that, the diameter of stems are significantly larger. So from 25 to 30 centimeters, 20 to 30 centimeters, they were producing from 30, 35 to 50 centimeters girth diameter. So
doubling the volume of timber in half the time.
Virtually doubling. And what I'm saying, apart from just selecting species, what we would recommend is a specific treatment of the species that will enhance their growth rate and adaptability, regional adaptability. And you do it using specific techniques. We can talk in a little bit more detail perhaps later on, but these techniques are available, and they can enhance the production. As far as food production is concerned, we can use similar techniques in greenhouses, for example, to increase rate of production of greenhouses, 2 to 3 times. So that's again in a highly populated area or in regional areas, allocating production facilities to supply green food of immediate need for people can be done through greenhouse architecture. So again, we are talking about a variety of tools, a variety of methods that we can actually put together. But going back to your original question, I just wanted to point out, how do we make the whole thing work? It's virtually impossible for us to say, here is the planning process, that's what we are going to do, and that's the outcome. We have to apply adaptive management techniques. In doing so, we have to have government planning, and we have to have farming community support. And with these two components and technology, we can do a very effective master planning to provide regional growth, sustainable regional growth. Just with those components, and they are very rough components. There are some finer details, and we can talk about those. But I think those components.
My question is about the mechanism, meaning, is it a simultaneous process that we initiate things from at the IGLC and simultaneously we handle the forestry and everything, or does it require a study of months or at least weeks before the forestry could actually be initiated? Wow. And is it a simultaneous process in a sense that by the time IGLC is up and erected, we would have gone through a certain initiation process of the forestry? Or am I to think that IGLC would get to see the effects of or the benefits of the forestry mechanism after having been erected in 3 years, 5 years down the lane? Or how does that's the question.
No, it has to be staged. It has to be staged. And like Will already pointed out, the natural mechanisms have to be established first, and then the global city, leisure global city established after that. So we have to rely on those natural mechanisms to help us. But before that, what we need to do, and we'll mention that, we have to look at functional capacity of the landscape, and we have to make a clear picture of what landscape is aiming for. And I'm kind of treating landscape as a living entity in a way, because what we have to do, we have to help to reconstruct that living entity that will support human population. And
can I
make sure that human population has enough sense to maintain that balance between the two.
Can I go back to Zubi's original question, because I sense frustration that there's not yet an answer. So I'm going to simplify this and not talk about the project and not talk about Pakistan. I'm going to talk about something else. There's a block of land that was 1,000 acres in Colorado, on the Colorado River. There was one landowner. So we're not wrangling with multiple land users and people who are unwilling to do what we want. This is a willing partner who wanted to improve 1,000 acres. So this was the Colorado River Ranch. It's quite famous in America. It's on the Colorado River, quite high up, and it's an elevated site. And I visited this place with Peter Andrews, Sergei, and 8 years ago. I don't know when that would be. Anyway, it was a while ago. And Peter and I were there at a conference in VII, just nearby. And I'll tell a little story because it's kind of cute and it sort of rams the whole thing. Both Peter and I ride horses, and we figured we were in Colorado and there's cowboys everywhere. And I said to Peter, we should go and find some cowboys and go riding for a day. What do you reckon? We were at the conference, right? And he said, that's such a good idea. So he didn't exactly put it that way. It was a bit colourful. So we went to the conference organisers and they said, sure, that should be easy enough. And they got onto the Colorado River Ranch and they said, we'd be delighted to host a couple of your conference speakers. And so we went down there. It was down out of the mountains. It was still high, but it was. And they hosted us for the day. They put on a slap-up barbecue, and they were lovely, And then they gave us horses. A couple of cowboys took us right up to Dry Gulch country, and we saw bald eagles and rattlesnakes and all the things you expect to find in cowboy territory. And as you would expect to find in cowboy territory, the grass cover on the ground was 25%. So, 25% was grass, 75% was dirt, dry dirt, right? Now, they had the Colorado River running right through this 1,000 acres. This is a big river, right? Lots of water. And they were constrained by the laws that regulate the use of water out of rivers in America, very strict. And so they could pump a certain amount every day. And what they were doing is they had pumps and they had 300 millimeter diameter pipes, and they were throwing the water up the slopes, and it was spewing out of the pipes through holes that were put in the pipes intentionally to allow the water to run back down the slopes into the river. And so what they were actually doing was allowing a lot of the water to evaporate, and it was running down the slope so fast that it was pulling the nutrients out of the sandy soil and putting them in the river. So they were degrading the quality of their soil. So, okay. So we just observed that. We could see that just riding around on horses, what they were doing. And we got back to the barbecue, and we were having this barbecue in a paddock under a big tree, and the horses are tied up, and it's all very lovely, And then they said, well, what are you guys here for? What are you doing? And Peter started explaining, and they said, what, do you think you could help us? And he said, oh, yeah. He said, it depends how willing you are to listen. And they went, oh, well, we can listen. And so he said, it's very simple. All you have to do is stop using your pesticides, stop using your herbicides, stop using your fertilizer, put your cattle on that side of the river for 6 months, throw all of your pumps and pipes in the bin, get rid of them, and get your tractor, which was just a standard Massey Ferguson, about a 1.5 ton, 2 ton unit with a blade on it, and cut a swale or a rut in the ground along a contour, and all the spoil that comes out of the rut, you make a little berm on the downhill side. And he marked it out for them, and he said, do another one 60 metres below that and another one 60 metres below that. So we did, he indicated this, it was about a 250 acre area, right, that they did that. And they went, really, is that it? He said, yeah, if you do that, you have no idea how your landscape will jump to attention and become healthy and thrive, because you'll be using all of the forces of nature will be on your side. Gravity, rainfall, sunlight, insects, small animals, everything will just work for you instead of you fighting it all the time with poisons and washing it away. And they thought about this, and we didn't know whether they'd do it or not. We went back to the conference, we flew back to Australia. 18 months later, we received by email photographs taken from a horse with standing up in the stirrups, holding the cameras above their heads. So these cameras are about 3 metres above the ground, and they were just able to see through a sea of grasses. In 18 months, that 250 acres was covered in bright green grasses, 3 metres high. It was so significant, the change, that there were complaints from 2 of their 4 neighbours that they were cheating with the water usage. And so the Environmental Protection Authority came out and discovered that they'd thrown all their pumps away, got rid of all the pipes. They had no irrigation. They were taking no water out of the Colorado River. They'd actually literally taken Peter at his word, because he said, throw that away, that's rubbish. Get credits on any drugs of your chemicals you're using, that's rubbish. They did all this. They saved $100,000 a year just in chemicals. And then the neighbours said, can we have some of this? How did you do that? And this, so their properties were still 25% grass cover, yellow dead grass. And here we had a pasture so rich in brilliant green grasses, 3 metres high. It looked like a miracle. If you looked at it from a satellite, you'd think something weird had happened. And all they'd done was return the landscape to its original function. It was startling. And it was really lovely to receive the photos and have that reinforcement at how easy it is to return landscape. Zuby, 18 months. Now, they're only growing grass. If you want to grow fruit, it depends on the fruit tree, but 3 to 7 years later, you might have fruit.
Yeah, but that's because they listened. That's because they agreed, and they actually did.
There was only one person. We didn't have thousands of landowners going, oh, I'm not sure about this, and if my crop fails, I'm going to be impoverished and I won't be able to feed my family. And that's what's going to happen in Pakistan, because that's what happens in the Philippines, it happens in Africa, it happens in Australia, it happens in Germany. You can't get everyone to agree, particularly since they've been doing that way for decades, if not hundreds of years.
Okay,
It's
so
difficult. And so the problem is more complex. So if everyone was on, you know, we could make Pakistan the new Ireland. But we'd have to have everyone agree, and they do exactly what we asked them to do. But that's not going to happen. That's not realistic. We need to educate people, and then we're not going to get everyone. And then we're going to get in a whole area that will work. And then people go, what happened there? And some people will say, oh, it just rained in that area and nowhere else. Yeah, no kidding, because we made it rain. Yeah. So, but they'll come up with excuses why it won't work where they are. We've seen it quite a few times. This is, the farmers will just, no, I'm going to do it my way because I know that that works. It's a risk to do what you did. So there's a very complex problem when you talk about countries or cities.
Just like you
It's
mentioned,
not straightforward.
Just like you mentioned, a pilot, a start would actually a visibility of something.
Absolutely.
A pilot project of such sort could actually make people believe in this.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. But you could also argue that, do we have time for a pilot? What, in 3 years' time, what have we got?
This
Not
is what
much.
I'm saying.
Yeah,
That
so,
if we do something simultaneously, meaning when the IGLC project hopefully initiates, then we can have on a private property, on a private piece of land, show people by means of a pilot project that, okay, this is how it would actually visibly be in front of you in a matter of 6 months to a year, that how dramatic these changes are.
well, that is the IGLC project, because the city is surrounded by a donut of agriculture that is 7 to 10 kilometres across. And so we can make a huge impact on that area very quickly because it's owned by the city.
Yeah, that's so there's two ways to do it. One is show and tell, right? So you show it, this is how it works, and this is what it does. And if you supplement that by, say, a guarantee to buy the crop, so like last year you had a crop for 10,000, so we will buy a crop worth 10,000 for the next 3 years or 5 years, whatever it takes. We will guarantee that. So you put these two things together, and I think you will have an extremely successful program. They did that with the farmers in Germany. Like, we don't want farmers to farm, like huge farm. We want farmers to be protectors of the ecology of an area. That's basically the aim that Germany is going for. So what they did is they just say, okay, you get a salary for that.
Yeah.
So
look,
we buy the crop you don't produce. Yeah.
So, and I totally agree. And what farmers need is surety more than anything else. And you look at the American farmers at the moment with the program that the Biden administration is putting out across agricultural land. They're paying farmers to not farm, and the take up is massive. Well, why wouldn't you? You don't have to work and you still get paid the same amount. It's only about surety. So this is human. This is the dynamic of humans and how we need security. Yeah, it's not about the outcome of creating food. We're trying to create food and give surety, as you say. That what you say will work perfectly. I'm sure of it.
Because what they're concerned about is what they make at the end of the month.
Yeah. So it takes the government to be brave enough to say, you know, what Sergei and Will are saying, that makes sense. We've checked it with our guys. We can afford to do that. We can guarantee it because in effect, we're just guaranteeing that what they're saying is right, because the money we put down as surety will turn into food. And so really it's not money down the drain at all. They're buying food. The risk is that it doesn't work, but we're past arguing that with people. We know it works. So it's just a matter of getting the surety.
I do not know the cultural setting in Pakistan, but what I do know, in the West, money assurance will work. You know, if you put certain amount of money, that is considered to be, you know, certainty. But in some countries with different cultural backgrounds, money is only part of the picture. And my question is, what is the main thing the farmers would want to see as an assurance? Is it just money? or maybe
in-
something else.
In some cases, yeah, at the end of every month, even if it's crops or if it's production, it ends up translating into what they make or what they take home. Or yes, to some levels, I'll give you an example. When the solar powered submersible pumps were introduced in the Pakistan market, what happened was that people were, the farmers were very skeptical about it because they had to remove their existing pumps and change the whole setup into something so new to them, that which was not even there for so many years for it to be considered reliable. But then what happened was that I remember, because I happened to install a few of those solar powered submersible pumps in our farmland in Punjab. So what happened was that we said, okay, you know what we would do is, because it's a costly affair that we are bringing to Pakistan. So what we can do is that you take these pumps in monthly installments. The first thing that it would guarantee for you is that as long as the installments are not completely finished, the company would guarantee the success of it and the servicing of it. Because if you buy it on cash payment, the company could just pack the bags and go away. So these 12 months or 2 years installments would guarantee their existence and also their servicing and also the quality of the product. And secondly, immediately when you go to solar, the amount of bills that you pay for electricity for running these tube bells that you have, which are very high power tube bells, that's going to go down. So what they noticed is that, okay, immediately the first thing that we do is that there are no electricity bills over there. So that's first saving that they got. Then they realized that they're so energy efficient that the production was of water, the output of water was doubled to some level. And they started selling that water, the additional extra water, because of the sun being there, the water was being pumped and they had surplus of water. So they started selling water as well. So I think in cases like these, where you bring a revolution to farming or to cultivation, I think the main aspect at the end of the month for them is how much they would save, and what is the sense of security that they have, that if they apply new technologies, their existing system would not be at stake of some sort of a gamble, that if we go for this, at least we should have a cushion to fall back on. And I think in this case, you are coming up with ideas which give them both.
Yep.
Can I just go back to the water security issue just a little bit, because there's another thought has occurred to me. I've been talking about the water being stored in the ground like a water tank, but that's not drinkable immediately. It does grow trees which create a microclimatic effect, which creates rain, dew, and then rainwater collection. It doesn't have to all go back into the ground into crops. It can be collected on roofs and put into tanks and made potable by filtration and sterilisation and service the people. Now, I live in Brisbane in Australia, and in the area that I live in West End, which is the west end of the city, we have a population density of about 4 people for every 800 square metres. So that includes roads and schools and land and everything. So 4 people every 800 square metres, or 1 person every 200 square metres. Now, with the number of roofs that are domestically owned, so this is not commercial or government buildings, if the rainwater was collected on every roof, and on average the roofs in Australia in this area are 120 square metres for 4 people, so that's 30 square metres per person, there is enough water if everyone had a 10,000 litre tank attached to their roof to have water security. Wouldn't have to import water. We'd probably export a little bit. That study's been done. That was a PH study done about 5 years ago. Very interesting. And we're in a city suburb. So fairly dense for, for a Western country. Most of the properties are 1, 2, 3 stories high. So you can see that, and possibly not as dense as some areas in Pakistan, because Karachi is very densely populated, and I know there's an issue with 2 families living under one roof. That's kind of part of the issue that the Prime Minister is trying to attack at the moment. But what I'm saying is that the moisture can be enticed on, can be brought down onto roofs, into tanks, and then consumed by people, and sustainably. So it doesn't all have to go into the ground. Once you've filled the water tank in the ground, you don't have to fill it again. You just keep topping it up. So you have excess water. What does the excess water do? It runs down the river systems back down to the sea, and we would hope that we'd be able to influence the landscape between the project in Islamabad and all the way down to the sea, to influence that landscape so that it retained as much of that runoff water as possible. It was just another thought on the whole water cycle thing and how sustainability is brought to a project of this size. Sorry, that cut across the discussion, I know, but happy for it to go back to where it was.
No, I think it's very interesting, fascinating listening to all the discussion. Once again, time seems to be escaping us. I know that the guys over in Australia have hectic days again tomorrow. So, Zubi, any further questions before we try and wrap up? You're muted.
Zubi, you really need to turn your mic on.
Sorry. So the only question I think is that I'm left with is how quickly are we going to get this thing on ground? And
well, that's Raza, that's your question, man. You feel that one.
Well, like with most things, these decisions are driven by commercially, by funding. We are working very hard to try and secure the funding. Once we have the funding in place, then it's all guns blazing. We just open up all the water, all the taps, and we go full-fledged move forward with this. I wish I could give a more definitive answer, but I think within the next 3 months, we should be able to give a clearer, concise schedule that we're going to work with. And that's the best that we can give at the moment. I just want to manage everybody's expectations. We're working very hard to secure the funding. And once we have that in place, then we move forward.
okay, and in the meanwhile, I'm working on getting our government officials on board for this. And so I'm pretty hopeful that that this whole discussion we would be having soon inside Pakistan with all of these team members together here in Islamabad very soon. Sorry about that. And so let's hope for that. And I'll let you do the finishing of today's episode, and then we look forward to the next one.
Thank you. Once again, just an immense thanks to our guests for tuning in and giving their valuable time for these very important discussions that we're currently having. Hopefully next week we'll pick a further topic. I think we were discussing that we may discuss the whole energy topic again in a little bit more detail. So once again, thank you, Will. Thank you, Sergei. Thank you, Mushin, for your time and contribution for this discussion. And thanks, Zubi, for hosting it.
Thank you very much. Thank you all from the Grey Lounge side to all the gentlemen. And yes, and in the next episode, I'm thinking that we have a list of questions that came from various places after listening to the episodes. So maybe in the next episode we would take those questions and try to address them so that we are all.
Let's try and discuss them early on, right at the beginning of the program, and then that will just elaborate the program. Because towards the end we just seem to shoot off at different tangents and. Run out of time.
We can base the next episode on the questions.
Okay, good,
yeah.
Good.
Okay.
And I thank you very much, everybody. And
thank you, Zubi.
for your
Thank you.
time and for the extensive discussions that actually help us get to know a bit more about not just the concepts, but the project that we are really looking forward to have on board, on ground in Pakistan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and until
Goodbye,
then,
everyone.
Goodbye.
adios.
Bye-bye.